we have a good cause for coordination. So I see it as a pretty deep reason for cooperation, and I think it's going to come.
Do you think when you were in Beijing, because again, a lot of talk about China suddenly becoming aggressive, thinking about war in Taiwan, were they in a war mood? I mean, was that at all evident? Or you said that they were calm and optimistic? That suggests, on the contrary, that they're not, that this is not really, again, what they're about at all at the moment.
Well, it's also the style of Chinese diplomacy, completely the opposite of saber rattling or announcing threats and war. Every word that we heard from every cabinet member, Politburo member, the premier, was about peace, multilateralism, cooperation, the need for sustainable development, the openness for business. It was a charm offensive to begin with, but that's also telling. It was not that we're in deep crisis, we're about to go to war, we're mobilizing, no one should threaten us. They may say that in other venues, but that is certainly not the style or the feel of the diplomacy. The feel of the diplomacy is, let's reduce tensions. There's no reason for them. We have business to do. We have challenges to meet, including common challenges like the energy transition. They really believe that, and for very good reason. And they know they have a lot of internal development issues as well. They're aiming for the next quarter century to make huge advances in quality of life in China. They face, like everybody, the aging population and other things. So there was lots of interesting substantive talk about quality of life and normal issues. But war was not the discussion. What was the discussion was we need to have a peaceful, multilateral world without threats. So we really need to calm down and work together. And that was absolutely the rhetoric at every point.
It's very interesting that you said that the big relationship could be India-China, which, by the way, I completely agree with. But of course, that's not what most people are saying. Most people are still saying that the big relationship is China, the United States. What is the feeling about the United States? Is it exasperation? Is it fear? Are people becoming angry with the policies, or are they still saying to themselves, well, maybe this is just a period of tension, but it will pass. We'll be able to get back with the US before long?
I think the main mood was a bit of perplexity and exasperation. I had at least 100 people come up to me and say, what's going on in your country? We don't understand it. Where is this anti-China animus coming from? We don't get it. So there really is a perplexity. There was, in high-level discussions that I was happy to have, a real question: why is there the war in Ukraine? Why did the U.S. push? What's the basis of this? Why does this make sense? And so forth. And so I think there was puzzlement because the U.S. is underperforming its fundamentals. Let's put it this way. This is a country in a bit of self-created collapse of foreign policy. It's losing friends and influence, not just because of a gradual shift of the world, but because it's making poor choices everywhere, making threats, wagging fingers, telling major countries what to do, what not to do. And it's, viewed with puzzlement because they're not saying, oh, we're afraid, what's the U.S. going to do? But, doesn't the U.S. want any friends anymore? Is this really just growling, expected to get somewhere? So I think there's mostly perplexity, a lot of annoyance, no doubt, especially over an overt U.S. foreign policy that says on its face, our aim is to hinder China's economy. It's quite a foreign policy. It's not directed at any specific thing. It's it's taken as normal that U.S. politicians would say China's economic development is not in our interest. It's a pretty arrogant position. So I think there's annoyance at that, but I wouldn't say that this was the overwhelming concern. I think the feeling of, and it makes sense from China's perspective, is, if the U.S. is going to be that way, we've got another 96% of the world population to deal with. It's a little bit weird. We're not anti-U.S. We'd be happy to have normal relations, but I think the feeling is we can move on also, and I think that feeling makes sense. Actually, this makes sense in many of the areas where I'm working, trying to, push for a more effective global financial system and so on, where the U.S. is definitely the laggard. You say, oh, you can't pass any, constructive reforms through Congress. But my feeling is, okay, if the U.S. doesn't want to play, there's the rest of the world to move forward. And I think that really is the Chinese view, and I think the Indians are, coming to that view as well, that we got a lot of issues at home, we have a lot of issues internationally, and we're not going to let one country and its snarling and its sanctions and its unilateral measures and its reports about us tell us what to do.
Because one of the most interesting things over the last few weeks, months, is the amount of deals that are being done without the United States. I mean, we've had this breakthrough deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered by China. We now have what looks like a reconciliation between Syria and Saudi Arabia as well. We're having moves, as you correctly, I mean, I'm sure you're right, by the way, about in India and China coming together. We've had Putin meeting Xi Jinping in Moscow. And from what I can understand, that was also mainly about economics, not arms or anything of that kind. Do you think there's any chance, though, because this is the other thing they always talk about, is that China will now step in and try to mediate the Ukraine war, that this is the next move that the Chinese are planning on? Again, I have to say, I don't actually personally see much sign of this, but what sense about that did you get in Beijing, maybe?
I think the Chinese view is on the war is very clear, which is this war is not good for the world. It's, first of all, not good for Ukraine. It should stop. It is a war to a very significant extent about NATO expansion, which China certainly does not support. In fact, it regards as pretty irresponsible of the U.S. And so